Good morning from Washington, D.C. Good evening, Taipei, and welcome to our Cross-Strait and Beyond seminar sponsored by the Taiwan Cultural and Economic Representative Office in Washington, D.C., also known as TECRO. Today's session will be about narrative warfare in Taiwan. My name is Marcus Garlauskas, and I'm the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. We've got a great panel of experts to talk to today, so we'll jump right into the substance of this seminar. Narrative warfare has tremendous implications for Taiwan's security, but it's a bit of an elusive concept lacking a widely accepted definition. So to help frame the problem, I've asked a top expert to help us define this issue, and I'm pleased to welcome Colonel Gitapong Eddie Perushabuter, U.S. Army retired. Eddie is currently a non-resident senior fellow with the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, and he's working in the private sector after a distinguished career of almost 3 decades as a U.S. Army Psychological Operations Officer. He's been implementing concepts throughout his time of service, supporting development of strategies, planning, leading, and executing operations in the information environment. And he also conducted research on narrative during his tenure at the U.S. Army's prestigious School of Advanced Military Studies, also known as SAMS, in 2011. So, Eddie, over to you to tell us a little bit about narrative warfare.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcus, for the kind introduction and the opportunity to speak on narrative warfare. So I'd like to start us off with a very brief introduction to frame our seminar today. So narrative warfare is an approach to conflict and influence in which narratives, constructed stories that shape how individuals and societies shape and assign meaning to events. They become the primary battleground to undermine, destabilize, or demoralize an adversary. Narrative is one of the most powerful central concepts in warfare. Narratives influence the development of political systems, national level policies, strategies, campaigns, tactics, and simultaneously affects how an individual's identity that drives behaviors and actions. And as Marcus mentioned, as a retired psychological operations officer, applying narrative techniques was absolutely essential in conducting operations in the information environment. Many years ago, I was a member of the Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines. The task force, directly supporting the armed forces of the Philippines, was tasked to expand our area of operations to the island of Jolo and the surrounding Sulu archipelago to apply pressure against the al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group, the Abu Sayyaf. Within the Sulu archipelago, and especially the island of Jolo, the ASG found the Tausug population sympathetic to their cause, hostile to the armed forces of the Philippines, and even more hostile to the U.S. presence. The embedded hostility was driven by a long-standing narrative of being a fiercely independent people resistant to central governance from Manila and deep historical resentment during the U.S. colonial control after the Spanish-American War. So our combined task force, initially focused on combat activities, failed to gain traction. So we had to completely change our operational paradigm to waging peace, a combination of civic and combat actions, which over a relatively short period of time successfully changed the narrative of the U.S. presence in the area, as well as the armed forces of the Philippines. Now, in my personal experience, most of our effort in national security are concentrated in the ability to fight. We study strategy, policies, tactics, capabilities, and make countless predictions on how weapon systems and soldier formations will perform. Narrative warfare, on the other hand, implores us to examine identity, meaning, construction, and the communications of stories, the will to fight. Narrative warfare directly impacts the nation's morale, public support, resilience, and national identity. So history has taught us time and time again that human will, resilience, and ideals are consistently decisive factors in determining the outcome of a conflict and are reliable indicators for predicting deterrence and peace. So this understanding of the importance of human will is crucial as we face contemporary narrative conflicts, such as those outlined by the recent Atlantic Council's report on advancing freedom and defeating authoritarianism. So, and I quote, Beijing and other autocracies are unabashedly trying to create a world safe for autocrats. Authoritarian regimes across the globe are learning from one another and actively cooperating to crush democratic movements at home and rewrite international norms to advance their interests. Their actions are clear, consequential threats to American security interests. The People's Republic of China is actively conducting narrative warfare against our shared vision of freedom and democracy. The PRC's narrative warfare is most prevalent against the beacon of freedom, democracy, and prosperity embodied by Taiwan and narratives about Taiwan worldwide. I'm really looking forward to the next hour to learn and discuss from my colleagues Kenton and TCAT on how we can identify and defend against the People's Republic of China's narrative warfare efforts. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Eddie. I really appreciate it. And Eddie and I first served together in Korea, again, he's had such an impressive career as a practitioner in the information warfare space. And so, Eddie, we really appreciate you spending your time with us this morning. So now we'll go to our other two panelists, and let me explain a little bit about our format and how we're going to conduct the event, a little bit about us. So today's event is hosted by the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, which is one of 4 programs that's housed within the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. And so through written analysis, tabletop exercises, public and private events like this one, we inform and shape the strategies, plans, and policies of the U.S. and its allies and partners, of course, including Taiwan, to address key rising security challenges in the Indo-Pacific. And convenings like this one are integral to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the U.S. and the world. And so we're pleased to welcome 2 additional distinguished panelists to today's discussion, Kenton Thibault and Min Xuan Cat Wu, and of course, we've got Eddie already on our panel. And so we'll start with some thoughts from our 2 other panelists on the nature of the narrative warfare challenge that Taiwan faces. And then we'll have another round of discussion from our speakers on recommendations for how Taiwan, the U.S., and other partners should meet this challenge. And then we'll move to audience Q&A. So please go ahead to askac.org if you're interested in asking a question. And you can input it there, and you can feel free to do so either anonymously or you can add your name. So let's go to Kenton first. Kenton is a senior resident China fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Laboratory, DFRL, where she leads China-related research and engagements in the Democracy and Tech Initiative. She leads work examining China's role in the technology ecosystem, Chinese foreign policy priorities in the digital domain. She also co-teaches a graduate course on global information operations as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. So Hoya Saxa, Ken. Ken, over to you.
Thanks so much, Marcus. And thanks so much, Eddie, for that really elegant explanation and contextualization of narrative warfare. It's one of the better that I've heard. And kind of to that point, I'm going to be talking about some of the more global aspects of Beijing's narrative warfare campaign against Taiwan, particularly how it sort of recruits others in this ongoing effort to sort of erode Taiwan's sovereignty as part of its narrative warfare. And I think this will probably be a good complement to what will be TT-Cat's comments that really drill down into the Taiwan context. So just to kind of illustrate, I'd like to open with a recent event that hasn't really gotten tons of attention, but I think is kind of a good entry point into this conversation on how multi-pronged China's narrative warfare strategy is vis-a-vis Taiwan. So recently, China held the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. It's this regional organization that was set up by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs around 2000. It's between China and about 53 African countries, and it's sort of the primary, one of the primary engagement platforms that China uses to engage with the African continent. So the summit doc, which came out last week, includes some expected language on, African countries' support for the One China principle. However, a significant change in the language from past documents adds that African countries firmly support all efforts by China to achieve national reunification. And what's the importance of this? So while on its face, this is just some kind of sentence in an outcome doc, this is actually a step change in a very long-standing multi-pronged effort to erode Taiwan's sovereignty by codifying this sovereignty nullifying language at an institutional level. So this is just one example, but in similar submissions to UN bodies and multilateral agreements, et cetera, China has similar language. And this is an effort to really lay the institutional groundwork to legitimize its actions at on a legal or institutional level in the event of annexation. The idea is Taiwan's not sovereign, so it's not entitled to protection under international law. So why do I bring this up? Because part of a report that we put out recently at DFR Lab highlights that oftentimes we can pigeonhole conversations of China's narrative influence as belonging solely in the digital or information domain, or sort of belonging in one conversation, usually about disinformation, for example. But these are incredibly important parts of China's strategy, but they're just part of what is a multi-pronged narrative warfare strategy, as Eddie kind of referred to engage online and offline channels of influence, as well as covert and overt means in service of this same narrative goal, which is to undermine Taiwan's sovereignty. So given we have such deep experts on Taiwan, I wanted to call attention to the fact that this China's narrative warfare against the island is occurring all across the globe in multiple fora with multiple partners. And China's been somewhat successful in linking things like cooperation on technical exchange with global majority countries, such as in the FOCAC Summit doc, to actual behaviors like signing on to a document that undermines Taiwan's sovereignty, or like voting a certain way or not in a certain way in UN bodies that further China's narrative goals by lending them institutional legitimacy. And, as we know, China has a partner in Russia in helping to sow these narratives via these channels and through other means. So I'll stop there, but looking forward to discussing this further and diving into some of these themes and others that my fellow panelists bring up.
Ken, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And also, really, I think an important point you raised there, that even though we always think of China when we think about narrative warfare related to Taiwan, of course, Russia is a player as well. And interestingly enough, I learned that in this recent trip in the summer to Taiwan from TT Cat himself. And so TT Cat is the founder, I should say the co-founder and CEO of Doublethink Labs, a Taiwan-based organization that operates at the intersection of the internet, public discourse, civil society, and democratic governance. So several of my colleagues and I had the pleasure of visiting this very impactful organization during our annual Transatlantic Pacific delegation trip to Taiwan back in June, and we were very impressed by TT Cat's work and the work of Doublethink Labs. So he focuses on mapping China's digital online information operation mechanisms and combating digital authoritarianism. So TT Cat, we've had a perspective overall from a practitioner of narrative and information warfare. We've had a perspective from Kenton, who's an expert who's studied these issues, particularly as they relate to China's activities. So really looking forward to getting a perspective from Taiwan on these activities. So TT Cat, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Marcus, to bring me here. And it's a great honor to talk with your audience and your fellow panelists here. So in decades in China, there's a phrase to describe this Carnegie warfare or information warfare. It's what they say that if you count as the cost and the benefit, then buying Taiwan is better than invade Taiwan, or lie to Taiwan, deceive Taiwan is better than buying Taiwan. That you can use more little money and to achieve what you want to do. So when we talk about this Carnegie warfare or hybrid warfare, now people are identified that it's not different than the traditional warfare. It has been part of their core of their war strategy from the beginning. And another for what we have seen in the last few years, that U.S. skepticism or anti-U.S., anti-Democrat kind of a narrative is throughout all their operation. Couple years ago, from 2022, we saw, or before, during the COVID, we saw a lot of this disinformation campaign from the PRC or PRC-affiliated actors are targeting the U.S. or democratic value society. And during our own election, we see multiple times they are connecting all kind of a different narrative or conspiracy theory into the U.S. Anti-U.S. sentiments. For instance, like these. Last year, there's a biolab conspiracy theory saying that Taiwan is going to build a biolab and a bioweapon directed by the U.S. government. And of course, it's a fake leak document from the government and leaked to one of our mainstream media and spread widely to all kind of poor CCP, poor PRC media outlets. And a tremendous amount of the new disinformation actors, even they created a new narrative. We can also see that those actors are involved heavily with a lot of anti-U.S. Or anti-democratic this sentiment, spreading those sentiments. And also, I think this brought us to a why it's become more important. It's also, especially after the Ukrainian and the Russia war, we start to see that this is a strategy. It's not only targeting Taiwan as their own audience or Chinese audience, but also globally. They also spread those disinformation around the world to undermine Taiwan's identity and undermine Taiwanese. Just like a few years ago in 2018, they start to pressure all the major airline company to change Taiwan, Taipei on their website into Taipei, China. And this is the particularly, they try to undermine Taiwan's name and also twist the history and also spread those lies. And why we're seeing those lies and also those efforts to influence our own audience, our own voters. And I'm looking forward to talking more about the effectiveness and also how that becomes a serious problem more and more in these days.
All right, TTCat, thanks so much. So I thought that was a great first round to walk through the framing the nature of the problem and really helping the audience understand a little better the issues that we're dealing with here and how really extensive the narrative warfare efforts are actually. And so now I'd like to go to a second round and talk a little bit more about what we can do about it, working together. Again, Taiwan, the United States, and other like-minded countries and non-government organizations like Doublethink Labs to combat this narrative warfare and help win this narrative war and counter the messaging coming from places like Beijing and Moscow. So, Eddie, we'll go back to you to go first in this round and just a few minutes of your thoughts. So, Eddie, over to you. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Marcus. So from my perspective, a lot of the structures, a lot of the organizations we have within the national security apparatus, we have tons of authorities already. The framing I like to use is we call DIME, right? Diplomatic, information, military, economic power, right? Implementing these elements of national power and then really kind of focusing on the I. Again, as a former representative of the military information part of that, I have had the experience of attempting to coordinate military actions with the Department of State, with civic activities, and all of these things. The resounding message I always received is the Department of Defense, you have an unbelievable amount of resources compared to Department of State and other interagency actors. And I, I always am amused by this because actually within DoD, again, psychological operations and other information-related capabilities are actually one of the smallest and underfunded and least prioritized of all the actions. So again, I'm so excited to hear and listen about Ken's and TCAT's issues, right? It's about civic society, it's about other agencies, it's about getting entire whole of government and whole of society approach to increase our level of effort. And of course, I'd love to hear from my colleagues about, what is the appropriate role of the government and military in terms of executing, coordinating narratives and implementing narratives to counter all of these things that are coming from our rivals. Thank you.
Eddie, thank you. And I think contextualizing this, how narrative warfare, even though it takes place in the information domain, is not solely the domain of information-focused organizations, right? It's all of the elements need to work together to be able to win the narrative war. So Eddie, thanks for framing that. Let's go to Ken.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eddie. I'll just kind of open up and say that, just very, very broadly, open societies in general just have a fundamental national security interest in maintaining a rules-based, orderly, and open information environment. It is, not good for anyone, for threat actors to weaponize the open information system in service of, their goals, just full stop. So effectively addressing this challenge, as Eddie mentioned, requires a kind of a coherent strategy that really shores up information resilience at home and abroad. And this requires a holistic approach, taking into account this multi-pronged nature of China's influence efforts in the information domain. And I'll list a few broad recommendations here. This is tailored to the US government. But many apply to open societies in general. And in my report that we released a couple of months ago, we detail 23 recommendations, but I'll outline just a few here to kind of hit on some of those points that Eddie raised about the need for, different sort of facets of society engaging on this. So, one thing that we bring up in the report is, ensuring that foreign influence frameworks and strategies are aligned with partner approaches, working with partners and allies and coordinating with them on their approach to foreign influence and information manipulation frameworks in particular. So the Global Engagement Center at State, the European External Action Service, their information integrity and countering FEMI division, and other offices in allied and partner countries have existing frameworks for foreign malign influence. These should be contextualized and kind of, these should be talking to each other, and relevant offices should develop a mechanism for information sharing on activities undertaken by malign actors in the global information environment. At home, and, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up platform companies. Congress should pass and enact legislation that creates standards for companies to complete quarterly threat reports that are open to the public and outline details of covert state activity on their platforms. And similarly, platforms and communications companies should be required to disclose to the relevant government agencies when their platforms are targeted by foreign actors. And currently, such disclosure is really entirely up to the company's discretion and subject to the individual policy of a particular platform. And these should just be required as part of routine reporting. It's really difficult to develop a kind of a holistic response when we don't have the sort of longitudinal perspective of how threat actors are targeting, online platforms and in what ways their tactics are evolving, how the online and the offline are sort of speaking to each other, these covert and overt, complementary activities, how they're working together. And a lot of times getting the data from platform companies, having this longitudinal view can be quite helpful in understanding how things have evolved. Lastly, just increasing funding for civil society and non-government organizations focused on capacity building and research countering PRC weaponization of the information environment. For the US, we can also make funding on counter-PRC initiatives more fungible across agencies to achieve this, granting Congress the authority to kind of to do this, but also there's budget sharing. There's budget sharing processes that can be done, especially because there's been so much counter PRC money that's been allocated across different agencies. So some examples include, activities that should be funded include, educating stakeholders on the United Front Work Department and their related influence efforts, and how that kind of can intersect with online activities and offline. Empowering civil society groups to strengthen safeguards through, investment screenings, transparency regulations, because, Chinese, a lot of times Chinese financing comes with a lot of, it's quite murky. Encouraging collaboration between journalists and civil society organizations to raise awareness about PRC influence, especially issues like anti-corruption in local communities. So I'll stop there. There's much more to say in many other recommendations, but part of really addressing this challenge is shoring up resilience to the threat. And I'm eager to hear what TTCat says on some of the more granular aspects of in Taiwan relevant examples for that.
And just a ton of great material to follow up on there in the discussion portion, and just a few things I wanted to sort of pull out that I think were really critical. One is this nexus between the government and the private sector on this, and the importance of legislation potentially to shape this. Another one is, I noticed you mentioned the word resilience several times, and we've been thinking a lot in IPSI and in the Atlantic Council as a whole about the importance of resilience. This information piece is really a key element of that. And then another thing that really resonated with me, and we just had another a seminar on a different topic yesterday, where it came up the importance of having a common threat picture to be able to drive coherent orchestrated actions. And so a lot of what you just recommended actually would help us build a more coherent picture of the threat across all of the different organizations, public and private, that are dealing with this challenge. So I look forward to following up on some of these in our discussion portion. And so with that, I want to remind our audience that you can go to askac.org to put in your questions, and you can do so again anonymously or put in your name. And we're really looking forward to that portion of the discussion. But now it's time to go to our third panelist for some additional remarks. And so, TTCat, your thoughts on what Eddie and Kenton had to say, or I think you have some other things to add to the conversation. So, TTCat, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, before I jump into the concrete suggestions for what we can do to counter this information, if I may, to just show the some of the more data from our society. So during our last election, general election, a week before that, we conducted polling to test out the most common PRC narrative, how that accepted, their accepting rates among our own voters. And it's shockingly, surprisingly, that we saw a lot of them are highly, we know our society is very polarized, but what is shocking is that there's a very high supporting rate among a certain group of voters. I give you one example. So if we ask, do you believe which country should be held responsible for the Ukrainian-Russia war? Then among the three different major party supporter, you see KMT, which is traditionally more poor China party. They have almost over 50% of them believe it's a U.S. fault rather than DPP supporter or TPP supporter. Majority think it's Russia. And also a lot of the U.S. skepticism narrative, like do you think that U.S. is not trustworthy, U.S. is provoking China, and if the China attack Taiwan, U.S. will not helping Taiwan. Then you see the KMT and the TPP, Taiwan Power Party, among their supporters, they have 80%, 70% of the supporters believe those narratives. The reason I brought this up is that I think this is that we are talking about different level of the cognitive warfare or information warfare that we haven't been seeing decades ago, because we know those authoritarian regimes, they are very good at spreading lies, especially to their own people. But in order to be successfully to spread those lies and make people believe, you also need to stop other people to telling truth, right? So you do a lot of media censorship and media control within their country. Traditionally, it's impossible to do that in U.S. or in Taiwan because we have a freedom of expression. We have a free media society. But now the social media algorithm is changing the game. Social media algorithm run as this preference recommendation algorithm. They lock everybody into their own bubble that they only feed the stuff they think and they believe you like. So each one of us is kind of like living in this artificial multiverse that we only receive one side of the stories. So that brings to my point is that I think there's a lot of things we needed to do to break this this like multi-bubble universe. That the first one is that we need to really look into this polarization and who caused those polarization. And in our investigation, and a lot of them are benefited from the DFR lab, is that there's not only state actors, but also a lot of profit-driven actors, marketing firm or media company. They are helping to no matter which their client is, to manipulate the online information. And we need to find a way to strengthen the business model and also to find a way to ban those business activities by essentially they are putting the wrong or manipulative component into our information space. Second is that more evidence shows that the POA right now is investing more and more into the Carnegie warfare just by examining how much new paper or article they are publishing onto that topic. I think that we all know that they invest a lot of money. They have a tech force and a resource into their whole national defense strategies to Taiwan and our Indo-Pacific allies. But the question to ourselves is that maybe to Taiwanese government too, is that how much budget we have for defense that front at all, right? So if our enemy is spending that much money into this war strategies, how much money we prepare to protect ourselves? And then lastly, I would agree whatever Kenton just mentioned. Those are great points. And I just want to add one more is that we need to fund more projects to close the gap between the civil society, between our voters, and close the fund those initiatives that help to decreasing those polarization, to brought people back to the conversation and the intensify the situation when we come to the political debate. So I will end here and looking forward for more thoughts.
TT Cat, that's great. Thank you so much. And I noticed that you really zeroed in for a bit on that resource question that Eddie was actually alluding to as well. And so the resourcing for this is a really important element. But so much richness in what you just provided that again we can follow up on in the questions and discussion portion that we're about to begin. So we have a great I think set of questions and comments coming in through askac.org, but certainly we have enough time and space to address some more. So I encourage our viewers, if you do have comments or questions that you'd like to inject into this discussion, we have a little less than an hour left in the session, so plenty of time to be able to address some more. But I will go then, rather than asking my own question, because there are some already in there that are some meaty ones, I'm going to go straight to one of them that comes from an anonymous viewer. It seems the breadth of forums that China depends on unwitting cooperation from partners who don't quite realize what they are agreeing to. And so what is the counter to this? And I think that's a really important question. It was something actually, TT-Cat, that I was really struck by in the briefing that you gave us in Taipei, was how much of this activity is being conducted in such a way that it's unwitting people in the end that are executing this, that really don't fully understand that there is a government actor basically at the end of the trail of the activity. So actually, I think all of you could potentially address this, but TT-Cat, since you briefed us on this in Taipei, I'd be really curious if you could share your thoughts on this question of the unwitting actors and how we can counter that sort of activity. Thanks.
Yeah, so one of the major tactics that the PRC or other actors, state actors, they create is this manufactured public opinions that they probably, for instance, they pretend they are another 1,000 people online and they all have a different persona, and they pretended as one of your voters. They are random people. This is my, honest feeling, and what they want to do is try to influence the other real person, real voters, or people who hasn't decided yet. In our last election, we saw that this like a multiple attempt in different tactics, but it's all same strategy. Is that they created this like a fake polling websites and they publish fake polling, or they have this multiple different AI generated different people that they pretend as our voters, or they try to create this like a false comments into the public disclose. So I think that this is that, we had a lot of a debate too about the freedom of expression, that a lot of the people, if they actually believe those things, of course they can share, even that's a fake news or even that's misleading information. If they generally believe, of course they can say it without being criminalized. But what we are try to differentiate is that there's a group of people, they've been paid or they receive the money to say those things and or to do those manipulative activities. Or if one people pretend to another 1,000 people, I don't think that's part of the freedom of expression. So to adjust to the questions, I know that there's a lot of people who share those information. There's a lot of people, a lot of them are also the voters like us, right? So we are looking at not targeting them. We are looking at who is that in those, spreading the information flow. There's people who are receiving the money, they are profit driven, or they are receiving the direction from the foreign state, and how we limit their accessibility into our conversations. So I think this is a very important effort to make it separate and also that try to limit their effort and ability to manipulate those information.
TT-Cat, thanks for that. And great to have your perspective again there from seeing this up close in Taiwan. And let's go to Kenton next. And Kenton, your thoughts on how we can counter the unwitting actors who are doing the bidding without realizing it of Beijing and Moscow, for example.
Sure. Well, in the example that I gave up, I wouldn't necessarily categorize countries that are signing on to, these agreements as unwitting. I would just say that they have interests that in other domains, like ensuring connectivity and getting these goods from China that they want to deliver to their publics. These interests, outweigh the considerations of, signing onto a doc that sort of slowly erodes Taiwan's sovereignty. And that being said, in our report that we put out recently, we really stressed the need to what's kind of an approach that can answer for a variety of these sort of wicked problems that China's narrative warfare brings, and addressing the multi-pronged, multifaceted nature of it. And we really kind of put out this idea of developing a strategy for the information environment to combat malign influence in general. The U.S., we argue, should contextualize its response to such manipulation by developing a strategy that's commensurate with its values and referenced in other foreign policy documents in a way that recognizes the interconnectivity between the information domain and national security strategy. These documents include, for example, DOS's annual strategic plan and integrated country strategies, USAID and DOS's joint strategic plan, DoD strategy for operations in the information environment, Department of Commerce and USTR's strategic plans, and even initiatives from the Biden administration, such as the CHIPS and Science Act. And really central to this, which is something I brought up earlier, is the articulation of this strategy should be establishing an open information environment as a core national interest. So grounding the assessments of threats to the information domain from China or other threat actors in the context of what the U.S. aims to foster and develop at home and abroad. And just to give a little bit of meat on the bones to that, this strategy should be interlocking and self-referential. So, for example, a diplomatic engagement strategy for the Global Digital Compact, which is currently going on in the UN. It's probably one of the more important multilateral processes that you've never heard of for the future of the internet. Should be linked with ongoing efforts to address, the connectivity gap through investment initiatives like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, both in internal strategy docs and strategic comms. So, the reason why a lot of these countries are signing onto these documents is because they're getting things like connectivity. So, an effective articulation of such an approach in a strategy document can actually be found in DOS's International Cyberspace and Digital Policy Strategy that was released back in May. And it really links the building of an open and resilient digital ecosystem to priorities like shoring up resilience against nefarious efforts by China, Russia, and other authoritarian regimes to weaponize the information environment, to peddle influence and undermine their enemies. And it also really does take a stand on what the U.S. government is for, so ensuring the security of telecommunication networks, ensuring the effectiveness and transparency of global internet governance bodies like the ITU, and really highlighting the centrality of rights-respecting digital ecosystem, creating a rights-respecting digital ecosystem that emphasizes multi-stakeholder processes and is aligned with the approach of its allies. So I know that's a big mouthful and it's kind of a big ask, but really kind of the thesis here is that developing a strategy that is, holistic, self-referential, and interlocking is really kind of the best way to shore up resilience, both at home and abroad, and counter a lot of what China's doing in a way that is aligned with U.S. values.
All right. Ken, thanks. A holistic approach to countering these unwitting actors and many other threats in the environment. So now let's go to Eddie. Eddie, your thoughts on this issue of the unwitting actors that may be forwarding the narratives from Beijing and Moscow and how we can counter that.
Sure. Thank you, Marcus. And great comments from TCAT and Ken on this. Again, my thoughts on this is really when we're thinking about unwitting versus witting, or amplifying fringe opinions into the mainstream. One of the key principles that's been successful in the past is identifying, pre-bunking, debunking, and of course increasing resilience of the targeted population. So let's talk about how do we identify unwitting, right? Or if, again, in an open society, you're absolutely allowed to have your opinions, regardless of what spectrum of the debate that you're on. But to artificially inflate your what some people may consider being a fringe opinion within the spectrum of the debates is key, right? So what can we do to identify? Well, quite frankly, our intelligence community has incredible capabilities, right? It really is just a matter of prioritization from our national leadership. It always goes back to leadership. Hypothetically, we have the intelligence capability to count how many spare tires are there on an airfield, and there's some analysis that can come out. We can go down to the tread depths and glean all types of information. We can actually focus even a small portion of our incredible intelligence community apparatus into supporting, debunking, and prioritization of that entire capability for this effort, for counter narratives. Other things that we can do, right? After we identify an unwitting actor, right? It's a matter of collection, analysis, interagency coordination, and how to implement actions. One of the examples that just happened internally within our country was the DOJ's indictment on the actors, right? That there were, right now, of course, it's still being adjudicated, but there were very popular U.S. Actors who they say they were unwittingly supported by Russian influence money. Again, that is a positive example because the FBI, the intelligence community, gathering all the facts to put an indictment together, and then, of course, using the authorities and seeing, okay, what laws were broken, what can be prosecuted, how do we identify them? Again, it's not necessarily the fault of the unwitting actor, but identifying and saying, this is an adversary disinformation campaign effort. You are unwittingly taking money or being amplified with them. That's a start to how we can tackle this issue. Thank you.
Eddie, thanks so much. And I am excited to see the consistent references here to intelligence, of course, given my background and the importance of good intelligence to make this work, make these countermeasures work. So we had a question that led off with TT Cat for this first round, and I'd like to each round start off with a different panelist going first. And so, Kenton, there was actually a question that was directed to you personally, but then I'll ask Eddie and then TT Cat to also address this question if they have any thoughts. So Kenton, an anonymous viewer here asks, Kenton, per your comments on social media platform reporting, how can the U.S. and Taiwanese governments best convince private sector leaders to cooperate and champion regular reporting on foreign influence operations on their platforms? And to be fair, I was intrigued by your comments, so I had the same question. So how do we get the private sector leaders to do this?
Well, I think that actually gets to the heart of the problem, is that a lot of this is at the whim of the companies. We shouldn't have to rely on the sort of benevolence of private sector leaders to release information that's critical to foreign influence activities. Now, I want to say that there's a very important distinction and necessary distinction between domestic conversations and foreign malign influence, foreign actors seeking to influence platforms, which is why we, in our suggestions, we stick very intentionally to foreign actors. Because there are important and necessary legal silos on, regulating speech by government and, very important free speech protections for Americans. Speaking on the foreign actor front, that is exactly the problem, is that it's, kind of up to the discretion of companies. Some companies are pretty good actors in this space. Microsoft releases pretty regular threat reporting. Meta's been, very much releasing these kind of like regular transparency reports for a while. But other platforms where, there's consistent targeting, that we know there's consistent targeting where, foreign threat actors have undertaken information influence activities in the past are, it's like pulling teeth to get any sort of transparency. So I think that relying on the benevolence of these companies isn't just going to get us where we need. And so passing legislation, creating standards for these companies on foreign malign influence activities, I think is really sort of the what we came to as, the best way to really like ensure that this is a regular part of, the conversation. And also, part of that would be to help that Congress could do more also to require increased and more standardized access for independent researchers to relevant social media data related to foreign threats. So this would ensure policymakers have visibility in the ways the global information environment is being both weaponized by adversarial countries and used as kind of an early warning and monitoring system. So again, I'll say this is specific to foreign threats. And these are kind of like the ways that we see as it exists currently in the US context, being able to work. And I say that because we have a lot of patchwork of legislation going on globally that has different standards for platform companies. But in the US, that's what we recommended.
Sure, and it's great to be able to reference back to that research you've already conducted on this topic, and I encourage everyone actually to read Kenton's report. So let's go to Eddie next, and Eddie, your thoughts on this of what the U.S. and Taiwanese and other governments can actually do to encourage and convince, or I think, as Kenton is saying, actually direct private sector leaders to cooperate and champion this reporting on foreign influence operations on their platforms.
Again, thank you. Again, I love the recommendations in Ken's report that came out a few months ago, but I would like to add on a couple of the specific examples specific positive examples of public-private partnerships, right? That queuing back to the government's capabilities, the ones that I'm most familiar with is we can actually, we do, in some instances, share intelligence with private companies, right? To tip and queue and gather facts, and again, correlate many of these very, very difficult networks that hide behind a wide varieties of proxies, right? To figure out where money is coming from, to figure out who the witting and unwitting actors are, and of course, the technological advances that are out there to create bots. We really are concerned about AI generated voices and personalities, things that can be, increase the volume of negative or adversarial narratives into the discourse. And just like Kenton says, there's a very fine line between foreign sponsored activities and domestic activities. And again, I sincerely believe that we do have a lot of the authorities and capabilities here already, at least within the US apparatus. It's a matter of prioritization and leadership. Out of all the things that, all the operations, the campaigns, the most successful one is when leadership has put a priority and has inculcated within planning and strategy the narrative aspect, right? The influence and information aspects of defeating a adversarial narrative or operation, because at the end of the day, foreign policy is influence policy, right? They must be built, intertwined, and of course constructed, right? The stories that are constructed, implemented, it's more than just words, it's actions, and directing the capabilities that we already have into this effort will make a big difference. And then really my last point is from a military perspective, right? All of us are taught right from when we are young lieutenants going into command troops and formations. We call these warfighting functions, but they're just basically key elements that I, as a commander at all levels, am personally responsible for. So that's maneuvers, fires, intelligence, sustainment, protection, and information, right? Information is a relatively new concept. Again, when I, as a commander, I don't have to be an influence expert, but when I'm held personally responsible for resourcing and implementing information and tying it to all the other aspects of an operation, that's how we can begin to tackle and get at this issue. Thank you.
Eddie, thanks again for that perspective from your experience as a practitioner in uniform. Really, really appreciate that. So now let's go to TTCat. And we've had a lot of discussion of from sort of a U.S. perspective on this, but really curious, TTCat, about what you think, especially since you have, I know, interaction with the private sector leaders on these very issues. How can the U.S. and Taiwanese governments and other governments best convince these private sector leaders to cooperate and to champion the regular reporting on the foreign influence operations that are taking place on the platforms that they control? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a good idea to provide here, but I would say, echoing what Kenton mentioned, I think there is some like a lack of the incentive and also lack of the this like obligation or any kind of a stuff into those social media company. So we saw that there is a social media company, they willing to do a lot. They publish regularly on this like a FIMI or investigation. And they take down a lot of this China, Russia, or Iran-controlled network on their platforms. But we also see another platforms out of any kind of different reasons, they don't do anything. So the platform will start to think then why I need to spend those money or resource to that effort that why my competitor, they don't have to. And also that's the first. And the second is that in the last 5 years, not only us or DFR Lab or those platforms itself, I think there's thousands of the report about the PRC or other state actors coordinated network be taken down, be identified by the around the globe. But a very little effort we've been seeing be taken to targeting those actors, especially that why there's a lot of a business or private-driven actors involving. So I think that's why we brought out this idea and to really focusing on business or for-profit actors, their responsibility into this foreign influence mechanism. So let me dive in a little bit more. I think what we have right now is that it's kind of like the environmental protection before the human has that 200 years ago, right? So if you found that you can burn something and that can make money, the whole world, the whole city, the governments help you to burn it. Everybody want to join because everybody think that can make money. Because back into 100 years, we don't have the norm or any regulation about our air, water, land, or any kind of this. So this is kind of right now in our information space. If you can sell the activities, somebody tell you that you pay me 200, I give you 200,000 followers overnight. I make your videos and make your YouTube more viewer. I give you more comments and likes. And you just pay them, and they take those money, and by doing that, they are professional. They don't care who's their client, whether it's a China state or a shampoo owner, right? So they don't care. But those people are taking the money, and they abused the resource of the social media platform and the company, and also they are polluting our information space. So I would say that if we can find a way to help social media company to increase their incentive, but also give them obligation to targeting those business actors who's fundamentally their business model is built on those manipulative activities or shrinking their business model. I think that can maybe take more action and also give more incentive or, give more feedback to the community and the positive feedback. Right after, just after the full-scale war in Ukraine, we saw that some European country and also the U.S. recently, they sanctioned the entity that helped Russia to conduct those disinformation or propaganda campaign. I think this can be one of the good example and broaden this scope and also the sanction mechanism to more actors that involve those involve those manipulative activities. Yeah.
So to pull back on all those items that you mentioned, it all relates really, it sounds like, to the incentives, right? The incentives and disincentives for this activity, and I think that's a very helpful perspective. So we had one question that started off with TT-Cat going first and one with Kenton going first, and so now I'd like to go to Eddie first with this one, and then we'll go to TT-Cat and Kenton. And so stepping back to the bigger picture, thinking about the larger structures being used to fight narrative warfare and to deal with these narrative warfare threats. I know, Eddie, you have a lot of experience with the institutions and the processes and the authorities. And so there's an interesting question here, and this is not the first time I've heard this question, but certainly I think it's the first time I've had a chance to ask you this question, Eddie. And that is, what about reestablishing the U.S. Information Agency that was disestablished in 1999? And so the questioner asked, then can we have a well-funded organization to go on the offense in these areas and not depend on those who see this as unfunded extra duties, as essentially, Eddie, you had commented about the Department of State. And so this organization would be well-resourced, as you had mentioned, like DOD, has a lot of resources. And so Eddie, and again, just speaking, as we know, for yourself and not for your former role in the U.S. military and government or for any other institution, what do you think about this idea? And I'd be interested also to hear TT-Cat and Kenton's thoughts on this. So Eddie, over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Marcus. Yeah, that topic comes up a lot. It usually comes from my senior commanders when I am making recommendations to do proactive actions in the information environment. They'll say things like, Eddie, we are not in an area of active conflict. The State Department is in charge, as they should be, right? When the president says we're not at war or active conflict, why are you requesting to do these type of activities? Sure, we've kind of the technical issues here, but I'll continue. So one of the things that we ask is USIA. Unfortunately, when we think about the history of that, unfortunately, it was not actually the most effective apparatus, but it was well-funded compared to what the State Department has now. There was or is an artificial separation, as I mentioned earlier, between the development and implementation of foreign policy and influence. I sincerely believe that they should be the same, right? Integrating narrative concepts into foreign policies. And then from a US perspective, right, it's formulating plans, strategies, and operational campaigns. They have to be absolutely integrated. So what that really means is, one, taking the prioritization and the time to understand your audience, right? We have a saying in the plans community, no plans survives first contact. And it's usually because, this beautiful plan or strategy that I put together and coordinated amongst all the interagencies of the government, to get coordination for action or, going back and forth between the NSC and other interagency partners before we execute something. Well, unfortunately, we didn't give that to the CCP, and we didn't give that to Russia to gain their approvals and coordination, right? No plan survives first contact. And then when we go in and implement and try to gain traction, right? Trying to have the narratives that we push to resonate amongst all the different audiences that we need to communicate to. At the end of the day, it always is about prioritization and the attention that comes from the highest levels of government, from the president to the cabinet secretaries. It's got to start with that, right? They have to ask themselves, just like I mentioned previously with the warfighting functions for military leaders. What is the information and influence aspect of whatever policy or strategy that you're trying to put out? So that's one of the things I would like to say is, going back to some type of super organization, super resources. Again, that's a tactical solution to a strategic problem. I think first and foremost, prioritization of narrative concepts into the formulation of the authorities that we already have. Right, we have an undersecretary for public diplomacy. Let's actually fill that with a Senate-confirmed official and not an acting professional foreign service officer. The ones that I've worked with have been amazing, but they don't have the type of authority and carry the same type of weight within the highest level of national level leadership. So really, to sum it all up, we do have a lot of organizations and structures that are built already. We just have to prioritize them and empower them to do their activities. Thank you.
Eddie, I thought you would be the best person to lead off on answering this question, given your experience inside these systems. And so, TTCat, as we go to you, I want to note, to be clear, you're welcome to answer this from the perspective of the U.S. institutional model, but also, is there a need maybe for organizational change within Taiwan to create a new structure to deal with this, or can the existing structures do that? And so, TTCat, feel free to answer this question however you like, and then Kenton, we'll go to you next. Thanks, TTCat.
Yeah, so the similar conversation and the discussion is also happening here in Taiwan, that people are talking about whether we should have the offense. But I could imagine that as soon as our government starts talking about that, it will be used as the material and a big material for our adversary to attack our government, saying that they are also creating the propaganda campaign or disinformation, and that they want to drag you from this moral ground that you are also not better than others, right? And my argue point always to those people are this, is that thinking about the reason that those Carnegie warfare or public opinion campaign is working here in Taiwan is because we have functional democracy here, that if our voter change their mind, they can change the government. But even you change 99% of the Chinese people there, how they change their government, right? So if the offense, how much the cost you need to do into the offense and make it effective, right? Until the point that you can change their policy. I think that's something you need to put into the consideration. If it's about your national defense strategy, I have no doubts about that. But for the peaceful time, I think what we need is a STRATCOM, more STRATCOM and unified it, and even regional into Indo-Pac or among the democratic allies, and Taiwan should be part of it. In recent Olympic, we saw that our boxer winner, she got a tremendous amount of disinformation accusing her gender. That also showed that how small and powerless for Taiwanese government or Taiwanese society to voice out into different places, into different country or different language when it's come to this into attack or about Taiwan. And also we saw some Chinese actors is also using that case to undermine Taiwan or doing the attack. So I think it is like a cross-regional or cross-country among the like-minded countries, and can share and also have the best practice to have the STRATCOM to respond to those disinformation or propaganda campaign target each one of us. This is something I would love to see. Yeah.
Thanks, Titika. I think that's a very sophisticated explanation of this question, and it's really tough, right? The more that you sort of develop your capability to go on the offensive, the more actually that could be used essentially as part of the narrative war. The adversary pits against you is claiming that true information coming out there is actually just a product of your offensive information warfare operations. But the truth really is very powerful, right? And so when we're going on the offensive using the truth, maybe that's the most effective means. But thank you so much for those comments. And so we're going to go to Kenton now on this question, and then I think after Kenton addresses this question about structures, I think we'll change the format a little bit and we'll just go one answer each because we do have so many more questions. And then I'll ask the presenters, or panelists, I should say, at the very end, if you could just sort of give us 1 minute. And again, we'll do this at the very end, but think about it now. A sort of a 1 minute summary of like what your key takeaway is. You want to make sure that our viewers hear before we close the session. So like I said, we'll finish this round. We'll go to a speed round of one answer each, and then close with final comments. So Kenton, your thought on this the structural question that, or going back to the original one, what about establishing the reestablishing the U.S. Information Agency, and what do you think about this concept or other structural concepts on this question? So go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think I'd largely agree with Eddie and say that we do have a lot of the mechanisms in place that are sort of well positioned to respond to this kind of activity, but that resourcing is an issue, and also there's sort of a so the U.S. system as structured is largely resourced to identify, attribute, and take down information operations that are concentrated online. This structure, though, may hinder a more holistic response to influence activities, which often, as both of my colleagues have brought up, encompass much more than coordinated and authentic behavior online. So, for example, a combination of U.S. government entities have successfully disrupted operations like, China's Spamouflage Dragon, which comprised a vast network of, spammy accounts linked to Chinese assets that had minimal reach. So for ops such as these within the U.S. government, OD&I is responsible for, identifying influence operations. The Global Engagement Center helps with attribution, and DoD helps with disruption. However, this kind of approach and focus on online ops impedes the development of a holistic strategy to confront the systemic nature of, PRC information influence. And so I won't dive too much deeper into that, but a more strategic, coordinated, proactive approach to shoring up resilience, understanding, how are there ways to better, share funding, joint budgets, pooled budgets, how to better allocate some of these resources in areas that are, strategically important that, Eddie brought up, I think is kind of a much a more effective way to go about, building resilience and responding to China's activities, threat actor activities.
All right, thanks, Kenton. Great explanation. All right, so now we're going to go to the format again where we're going to ask the question just to one particular individual on the panel based on where the question came from. And so we started with Eddie on the last one, and so now we'll go to starting with Kenton first. And so Osmanthus T asks about the opinions of how the PLA's information activities toward Taiwan will change given the increased funding and resources, presumably meaning the resources coming from Beijing for these activities. So, Ken, what do you think about this question?
Um, well, I would actually turn to TT Cat or Eddie to answer that question. I think they
Oh,
would
okay.
be a little bit better positioned. I mean, I can give my answer, but I think they're probably better positioned to
Oh,
take this.
well, Ken, that's very collegial of you. Okay, well, so let's go to TT Cat. Since you've been on the receiving end of these PLA information activities, how do you think they're going to change?
Um, I really don't know, right? So I don't think that would change that much at the forthcoming future. That I think that at least so far we've been seeing that they are going. The trend is not stop or slowing down at all. Even we after the election, I think what they would do is more and more they were targeting our other countries as well to spread the same narrative against the U.S. or democratic society, democratic value, and also in other countries to try to undermine Taiwan or twist the history. That's what I'm afraid of, and also I'm more afraid and I'm more concerned about our capability to respond globally, or at least in strategically important countries. Yeah.
Understood. All right. Well, let's go then to Ken for another question and see if you want to take a whack at this one, Kenton. The popularity of China-based social media platforms allows them to become disinformation hubs because untrue pro-China information doesn't get taken down. So, are there specific strategies that we can use in the U.S., Taiwan, or elsewhere to combat disinformation on platforms that are based in China?
Yeah, so I'd say, going back to the regulation piece, regulating that, all social media platforms or communication platforms operating in the US have these mandatory sort of, disclosure requirements of when foreign actors target their platforms. I would say that, part of China's strategy for in the online sphere is to target has been diversification, has been targeting multiple platforms, not just, China-based ones. And so, this kind of holistic approach, I think, belies just targeting one app like TikTok, for example. Part of the game for them is diversification. There have been many more coordinated and authentic behavior reports and activities on, Western-based social media platforms. So I think part of the resilience piece, instead of maybe like focusing on China-based platforms in the US context, would be to have something like, regulations for social media on these kind of foreign targeting, also a federal, comprehensive federal privacy legislation that protects how and when Americans' data can be gathered and transferred, is going to do a lot to protect against a lot of sort of the what gets brought up in the national security conversation around China-based apps. I will say it's difficult for platforms like, WeChat. I'm speaking in the U.S. context too, because, the diaspora population heavily relies on WeChat for news, for example. And so any sort of news that is received on WeChat has already been filtered through Beijing's censorship apparatus, especially if you want to be registered in China as a news provider. You have to sign on to, all of the requirements for that app, which includes political monitoring and political censorship. So I'd say the issue of these kind of bigger social media platforms like TikTok is a different question than those that are used, those like WeChat and Weibo as well. I'll turn to TT Cat actually, our Eddie, for more on this, if they want to take a step.
Yeah, so real quick, Eddie or TT Cat, would you like to weigh in on this one before you move on to the next question? Or shall we move on to the next? Okay, TT Cat and Eddie both. Okay, just real quick, TT Cat first, and then Eddie.
Yeah, I wanna add on to Kenton's point. I think a lot of those, not only the Chinese control apps, right, or social media. I think what we really looking for our public disclose is more diverse over the opinion and also fair market of the public opinion to compete with each others with the substance and debate. And but instead of most of the social media platform is weighting the popularity and based on the algorithm think that what you like. So I think that's the fundamental question, is that whether or not we should keep relying on those social media for our public policy or our democracy debate and all this like news information. I think that's the core of the question. And all this Kenton just brought up is that the Chinese company, they also have to add another layer of the China censorship and their ideology into our own countries. I think that's create another layer of the unfairness.
Right, TTCat, thanks for that. Yeah, it is definitely unfair, essentially. All right, Eddie, over to you for your quick thoughts on this one as well, recognizing we're running out of time.
Sure, thank you. I was going to save this for some for my ending comments too, but again, although we're focused on the actions of social media companies, at the end of the day, it is about the users, right? The users teaching resilience, critical thinking, exposing and having the users understand that if I am on foreign-controlled social media apps and receiving my news for that, right? It's just like Kenton says, if I'm reading the news and I am aware that every single story, every single opinion, even just the algorithms that are feeding into me has been through the filter of the Communist Party of China, that is actually helpful already. And again, it's awareness, critical thinking to our citizenry and really to the rest of the world to understand that that's actually happening behind the scenes as they're consuming information. That's just a quick blow on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, Eddie, no, that's a really important context. Absolutely. All right. So the next question will go to TTCat only. And TTCat, again, we're running short on time. But the anonymous question here comes. I was glad to hear TTCat mention the importance of funding civil society. For example, strengthening investigative journalism and media literacy for information consumers is important for shoring up societies from disinformation. How are these sorts of efforts faring in Taiwan? What are the gaps in the civil society that need more resources within Taiwan as it relates to countering disinformation efforts? So TTCat, over to you.
This is a very tricky and also challenging for Taiwanese civil society here. So as the Taiwan also a very polarized politically, like maybe like the US, I don't want to. I don't know which one is more polarized, but in Taiwan, most of the civil society don't rely on the governmental money or funding at all to remain their independency, especially when those civil society like us work on the disinformation challenge or fact checking, especially they don't take government or public money, which limit their scope and also their resource into a different level. So I would say that I know there's another advocating for a kind of like a global center of excellence or different mechanism that different countries, they donated money into those agencies that independently run to fund those civil society that particularly work on those problem. I think that could be some kind of a possible solution. I haven't been heard for many years so far. But otherwise, I would say that most of the civil society, we still try to be more resilient and also strong. But that funding wise is not that much from our government.
Understood. Yeah, this whole question of the funding of government versus private is a challenge in many ways for every organization that exists in that nonprofit sector. So very good set of questions here. And again, we're very short on time, so we have time, I think, for just one more before we go to that speed round of 1 minute per per speaker for their final closing comments of anything that you want to emphasize or that we didn't get to. And so we're going to go to Eddie for this last one. Eddie, just real quickly, what challenges, if you can speak to this, what challenges have you seen the U.S. government face in breaking through the Great Firewall for information operations in China? And Eddie, fully understand if you can't speak to this one because of the sensitivities involved.
Exactly. So I am not going to talk about our capabilities, but what I can say is the strength of our open society, right? Our diaspora, right? That is by far much more powerful volume, influence of narratives than anything an official government spokesman or a military psychological operations can do. Again, the answer is not always the government, but it's the strength of our open society, right? It's the strength of our opinions. It's the direct connections that a multicultural society has with the people of China, Russia, right, or any other adversaries that are trying to put out contentious narratives against freedom and democracy. That is at a core our strength.
Eddie, that's a brilliant thought. And so the idea is maybe not getting through the Great Firewall, but essentially, in some ways, playing on our strengths to go around it, right? That there's other ways than technological to get through that. That's a great insight, Eddie. And I think that's a great way to close the actual questions. And so now I would like to allow you, Eddie, to take the floor again for a moment and give your 1 minute or less of comments before we go to Kenton, and then TT Cat will have the last word before I wrap us up.
Okay. Really enjoyed this session. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As always, I always learn so much from Ken and TCAT. Love your work and the mission of IPSI and the Atlantic Council. And again, I just want to come back to, why does our adversaries are so voluminous and places such a priority in narrative warfare? It is because they're absolutely vulnerable. They know that this is a huge vulnerability for them. They cannot compete against the ideals of freedom, democracy, open societies, right? They're absolutely threatened by it because it goes to the core of what our adversaries are standing for, right? And they place a priority in continuously executing narrative warfare against our common narrative. And again, we shouldn't take this for granted. And I guess that's really my kind of closing point is one, I am always hopeful that we always have the upper hand in terms of what we stand for and what people are going to gravitate and support. But we should not take this for granted. And maybe for the next discussion, let's talk about proactive means that we can use to communicate our narratives into populations that do not have freedom of information. Thank you.
Eddie, looking forward to that discussion. Thank you. All right, Kenton, over to you.
Yeah, I just could not agree more with what Eddie just said. I will say, kind of building off what he said, that the open, this open system that the U.S. has really championed and maintained, since for the last 80 years or so, has really been quite successful for us. And in their own official writings, China has tried to study this model. China has tried to replicate this model. Part of why they believe they exist in what's called a discourse power deficit, discourse power being this kind of agenda setting ability and leadership on the world stage, is because they, are at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the U.S. In terms of, the appeal of this open model. So that's when, I say the U.S. and open societies have a fundamental national security interest in maintaining a rules-based, orderly, and open information environment. It's because this has been so beneficial for us that, adversaries are weaponizing it is something we need to respond to. But, we have the ability to shore up our own resilience. And like Eddie said, it's because that they are at a disadvantage that adversaries are trying to weaponize this. So, we do need a coherent strategy to shore up this resilience. It needs to take into account the interdependent nature of the information ecosystem, and all the different ways that influence in the information environment show up. And until we do that, and until we kind of understand how holistic and integrated and interlocking this is, challenges posed by countries like China and Russia weaponizing the information domain will only intensify. But again, there is a fundamental security interest in maintaining this openness. It's part of our national strength. So I'll close on that.
Hey, Ken, thank you very much. And TT Cat, please take us home very, very concisely, sir. Give us some last words before I close this out. So TT Cat, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for highlighting our work and highlighting Taiwan. And we are looking forward to see more any way you can that include the Taiwan government or Taiwanese civil society into the conversation when it's come to the hybrid threat or Carnegie warfare or this like a new type of the information resilience strategy. And also as a civil society, we build a great network. We have so many partners in the Indo-Pacific that care about this problem, along with the Cantons and other partner in the world, and we need funding, a lot of money, more money that to fund our community. And any kind of initiative that reduce the polarization, I think we should encourage and double down. Last word is that I think we need to think about that the reason that Xi Jinping and Putin, they invest so much into their lie to their own people is fundamentally they believe that people are easily to be manipulated. They believe humans are dumb. And we as a democratic society, it's our duty to prove them wrong. So I will close here and thank you so much.
TT Cat, thank you very much. And thanks to all of our panelists for really an excellent discussion, for taking their time to share their insights. So this edition of the Cross-Strait and Beyond seminar series comes to a close, but this isn't the end of the conversation or the end of the Atlantic Council's work and the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative's work on this issue. So be sure to check out our website for forthcoming content and events on narrative warfare and a range of other issues. And thanks to all of you tuning in online. Great questions. Sorry we couldn't get to every question. And we hope you'll join us again soon, particularly for our next Cross-Strait and Beyond seminar, sponsored by the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Representative Office, TECRO. Thank you so much.